Citizen 12 is brought to you by Complexify, a social purpose corporation founded to support you living in alignment with your conscience and discerning what that is. Find out more at complexify.org. complexiphy.org.
Hello, citizens. My name is Paige Hulsey.
And my name is Emily Bogen, and
this is episode 11 of the Citizen 12 podcast. Citizen 12 is not a program or health treatment, but an inclusive place, common ground to share and learn. If you have not yet listened to episode 0, we invite you to do that. You'll get a good sense of what this show is about and hear our steps, which were inspired by Alcoholics Anonymous, and those can also be found through any of our sites.
a little more of a preface. This show, this content may stir stuff up for you. In some ways, that's part of the point, but also we want to acknowledge that this can be hard, uncomfortable, even disruptive. Please engage with us responsibly and don't be on your own with this stuff. Be in touch if that's the right thing. We care about you. It's why we're making this show.
Our podcast is created in Seattle, Washington. We acknowledge this as Duwamish land and strive to honor the past, present, and future Indigenous lives here. Citizen 12 supports Duwamish tribal services by paying real rent. Find out more at realrentduwamish.org. Today's show is all about meditation. As mentioned previously, this episode and its follow-up show will be all about meditation. I understand that the word meditation brings up a whole morass of different stuff for different people, and we're aiming to do some untangling here. You may have noticed we're experimenting a little with the format of the shows, attempting to provide a bit more of a predictable framework. Today we have 3 segments for you. First, we'll discuss contexts. Did I just say discussed? First, we'll discuss contexts for meditation, including common conceptions, and then our take. Then we'll share some about our experience over time with meditation. And finally, we'll look at benefits, both direct and indirect. And then in our follow-up show, we'll address common hang-ups, pitfalls, and traps associated with meditation. Before we jump into our first segment, I want to note that our Citizen 12 steps do not explicitly include meditation. In other versions of the 12 steps, like in the AA steps, meditation shows up in step 11, which is sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Our Citizen 12, Step 11, is do what is needed to deepen our surrender. As you'll hear today, both Emily and I have found that part of our story here includes meditation. And frankly, it's a little hard for me to imagine any life without what I think of as meditation. But I also see that my take on meditation isn't what's most common. And we'll jump in there with segment 1, contexts. Okay, common conceptions about meditation. The first thing Emily and I agreed was really important to address is how frequently what is there for people about meditation is some very rigid approach or method.
An hour a day, at the same time every day, for the rest of your life, or you really messed it up.
Okay, well, yes, that's the whole shebang, or part of it. Mm-hmm. I'm even thinking of when what meditation means for someone is only transcendental meditation,
Right.
Also known as TM.
Mm-hmm.
And for listeners, if you do or don't know about these kinds of meditations that we're going to talk about today, and we're not really going to talk about that today, that's fine. I will readily admit that formal methods of meditation, while something I have experimented with and learned about at different times in my life, they're not, for me, they're not really what it means to meditate. But for many people, and what I observe is that for many people, really almost what meditation means is some kind of learned or taught practice,
Mm-hmm.
which includes some rigidity. I mean, even adhering to what an app says to do in some ways is sort of rigid adherence. It's not some organic development of meditation. Mm-hmm. And again, if that wasn't clear, I'm not, I wanted to say poo-pooing, but that's a bit of a funny way of saying it. You like that word?
Poo-pooing.
I'm not poo-pooing traditional established methods of meditation. I am going to share here shortly that it's just not the whole story, and that there are spots where that might cap out as a useful context for viewing meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Another aspect of rigidity here, well, as you already said, was about like duration,
Right.
like an hour a day or even an hour twice a day or more, or that it is always sitting
Right.
down. That's a big piece that seems to be rigidly stuck for a lot of people, or what the content of the practice includes, whether that's repeating a mantram, or walking through a visual process, or reciting a passage, or clearing the mind entirely.
Right, I hear that a
That
lot.
would be probably the most common
Right.
concept about meditation, is that it what it means is like hearing no thought.
Oh, turning off the brain.
This other aspect of rigidity here, and I think it has to do with that we talk about meditation associated with the words discipline and practice. And so I kind of understand why this comes along with it, but like an attachment to that it has to be the same thing at the same time every day, or it doesn't count or something like,
Right.
and as we're going to talk about, this is not about devaluing practice or discipline or habit or routine. Those are beautiful things, but an over-dependence or over-focus on them can really detract from the bigger picture.
And what we'll talk more about later is like the creative aspect of it. If this sort of rigidity that we're talking about has a lot to do with thinking that, depending on someone else to tell you what meditation is, and having to abide by that.
Well, let's talk about that now.
Okay.
So our take, in addition, so in the past on the show, I've talked a lot about like what I think of as common misconceptions. And I realized it's not even misconceptions. It's like incomplete conceptions. It's like just partial. And that part of what we want to do with this show is to just flesh out some of that stuff a little bigger, to include more. So mostly not to take away the established way of seeing things and relating to things, but to add to it where that can be useful and empowering. So that said, yes, our take on meditation has come to include, well, yes, gentleness and flexibility, I guess might be a good word. I think, did you just say creative?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Making more space. I think of it as, well, yeah, making space for whatever's necessary and needed. And that comes and goes and changes. Mm. And usually it seems like the better I'm paying attention, the more I can tell that different things are needed at different points. And there's some of that agility. And this doesn't have to be in contradictory to discipline or practice. But I think most critically here, the thing about meditation that I have found so incredibly valuable is the gentleness.
Mm-hmm.
So, and to acknowledge and kind of take responsibility for that rigidity it doesn't seem to come from my conscience ever. It does seem to be like this external mandated thing. And sometimes even by my own ego.
Right.
But we've talked about the word spiritual before, but for me, rigidity and spirituality like don't really fit together. And just like we were saying, oh, maybe we didn't say this. But so one common kind of incomplete conception I see about meditation is that it's all about the focus of it is about the duration of the meditation.
Right.
So am I saying that in a way that makes sense? Like I'm not talking about just the sitting down or
like
the
it's
content.
a vacuum almost. Like
it's about the tool. It's like when we talk about meditation, people just talk about what you do while you're meditating.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be like if our value of transportation was all about while you're in the train, not where you get to go. Does that make sense?
that's a good analogy.
So thank you. That was on the fly. That's a new one. I haven't thought of it that way. But yes, the focus with meditation, talk about experience with meditation seems to all be about the train. And for me now, my interest in meditation is way more about all the time when I'm not on the train.
Mm-hmm.
So like the effects that the meditation is having.
Right. That became pretty apparent to me when I was meditating and still being weird. You know?
Are you telling me that you meditate now and you're not weird? Because I'm pretty sure that's not true.
Well, I'm still weird, but like it's when I was like, oh, this isn't like
a cure-all?
Right. And then it was really solidified when I read that Ivanka Trump does transcendental meditation. And so that just gave me some new food for thought. Will
you say a little bit more about that?
Well,
so I think what you mean is knowing that she does transcendental meditation.
And how she interacts in the world and in the actions that she puts forth are harmful, and so have mine been, even whilst meditating. So
it like clued you in to that just by meditating, that's not going to ensure that we're good people or something. Okay,
right,
but
yeah.
In some ways that was like news.
Well, I think that we're taught that, right? Like that's a conception, like an incomplete conception, like you said earlier. Because it's not easy to sit down for 30 minutes, right? In the beginning when you don't do that. So when you're at the beginning of your practice and you think, okay, I'm going to do this, like, oh wow, this effort is probably worth a lot. And it is not worth nothing, but it's not the end of the story.
That's great. So our take also includes that rather than having the attention be on the train or the meditation, like the content of the activity of the practice, that at least for myself, and I'll say more about this today, my what do you call that? Like intention is that whatever meditation I do, ensure that I am making space to receive any guidance. Mm-hmm. And I know guidance can be a tricky word, but to get that flow, that, to make sure I can hear beyond my ego and fear and feelings and thoughts. Mm-hmm. And I for sure have done meditation that did not make that space. So for me, meditation has expanded to basically be anything that makes it so that I am like ensuring that there's space for me to hear my conscience or God, mm-hmm. this guidance flow in. I can hardly believe I'm using the word flow publicly like this. I feel like this is
guidance
not usually
and flow in the
how
same
I talk.
sentence. You're
But-
flowing guidance.
So I guess actually maybe I'll take this as an occasion to say I and maybe I've said it before, thinking about a clogged gutter. I'm pretty sure we've used this metaphor on the show before. So living life clogs up my gutter, and that having the water flow clearly through the, rain gutter is what I count on to guide me in my life, my ability to hear my conscience. I mean, ideally, I think I would have this clear channel, and that fear and habit and life and circumstances, they, clog the channel all the time. And that for me, life and living a spiritual life is very much a daily practice of continuing to unclog the gutter that keeps getting clogged up. So when I talk about that, is actually what I'm referring to, is having a practice that makes it so I can get the water flowing through the channel.
Same here. And in addition, it's also, for me, like something concrete that I can offer back, like intentionally. A lot of my day can be, I run on a pretty tight schedule, and I want to know that I'm doing everything that I can do, right, to listen in. And so creating that space intentionally is like the time I can, like what I can give back to
That's
that
beautiful.
conscience. Yeah.
That's a beautiful context to consider it almost like an offering. I mean, show of good faith is such a funny term, but that's a little bit of what I hear. And I like that idea.
Right. It's an offering for sure. And also, I like the part of the meditation that I like, the common meditation that we think of, like in listening internally. Like I do kind of think that there's the external world, and it is very loud, right? And so, and there is a lot of sensation coming up from the body, and there is a lot of like stuff coming from inside of us. And so that listening in aspect too, I think, like honoring that and giving that some voice. And I think that that's like a big part of what a lot of like, Eastern, like Buddhist meditation and, things that we commonly know of, like are teaching us, is like part of what meditation is. And that's something that I have like carried with me. So it's not about like throwing out all of those things at all, but like you said, am I really making that space for unclogging, or am I not? And I could be sitting, I think it is possible, like, and I'm sure I have done it. Like I've sat for an hour in a classic meditation pose and not created space.
Well, and I anticipate we'll talk about this more with prayer. With prayer, I very explicitly talk about going through the motions. I don't think we think about that as much with meditation, because I think for a lot of us, we think of meditation as just going through the motions. That's all it is. That's all it's kind of supposed to be. And if it's more than that, it's like just good fortune. And if it's not, then it's like not up to us. And with both prayer and meditation, what I have found is that I actually do have more say about the efficacy of my practice than I used to think. And being responsible, again, has become good news, because it just gives me new access to doing different things so that I can, explore and figure out what works. But yes, that doing a classic meditation, I actually have a very clear recollection of one of the longer meditation classes I attended, where my sense of it was that space was taken away, that I was, like disempowered from hearing maybe what there was for me to actually be hearing in life. That the practice of the meditation was so convoluted, isn't quite the right word, but rigid in some ways, that there was not space. And and I don't think that's the fault of the practice. It may be that practice creates space for some people at some point. it just
or that it did in the past, yeah.
Or that it had in the past, but it wasn't an access for me at that point from what I can tell.
Right. And it makes a lot of sense. You know, years ago there were spiritual seekers and they found something that worked for them, and because we don't have a ton of that, you know, it's very much like our world today that we like practices and like become homogenous, and we all subscribe to like one particular way, like prescribed way of doing something, and it is disempowering. And this is another opportunity, I think, to take that power back a little bit and find our own way.
I love that you're talking about this, talking about the oppression of homogeneity is something I have reflected on, thought about, talked about a lot. We live in a time where people talk a lot about valuing diversity. My actual life experience is that diversity is seriously suppressed, that evidence of true variation of opinion, of appearance, of values is not well tolerated. Maybe even less well tolerated than days gone by.
Right.
And for me, this is kind of a glaring contradiction in our culture that I think is very exciting to shed some light on. And talking about it in some abstract way, whatever. Talking about how my physical appearance, which is different than anyone else's physical appearance, is just as valid of a physical appearance as anyone else's, has had real life consequences that matter and that are worth considering and engaging in, and things much more interesting and deeper than just physical appearance, but spiritual practices or ways of thinking or ways of nurturing and loving the people around us. There are so many ways in which making space for us to find our way and to have our right practice and path, whatever that is critical. My sense is that I was raised being told with words, you can be whoever you want. But then the action was not like that. No, not like that. No, not like that. No, not like that.
Right.
So people kind of said the words, you can be whoever you want, which those words don't even appeal to me anymore. I want to be able to be whoever I am. But then that has not been well supported in the world. My experience in life has been one of, forced conformity.
Right.
Conform. And some of us fit better into that conformity than others. For some of us, it's more painful than for others. Conformity has been incredibly painful for me, in large part because how I am is not just the stock same as many other people. Wow, that was a tangent I had no idea we would go on today.
Well, it resonates deeply. I also hear at the beginning of that, you're echoing sort of the disconnect of, we say that we tout how we advocate for diversity, me too, have an internalized sort of rejection of it, then kind of like an instinct to punish it, right? And I think that's systemic for sure. And that's I think it ties in great with meditation, because that's what it does. It helps us to reflect on those disconnects. How do I think I'm living? Who do I think I am? And who am I actually? And what am I actually doing? And, it's a way of reflecting on that kind of thing.
Segment 2, our experience. Obviously, we've already been talking a little bit about our experiences, but I thought I would share actually how I even came to meditate in the first place. And it's it's a little hard for me to get myself back in time to remember this because, well, for a couple things, it was really long time ago. I was 19 years old, and that was almost 20 years ago. And also, the circumstances that got me meditating have changed so much that I don't really think about it anymore. So at 19, I had a lot of anxiety. And a time of day when my anxiety would extra show up was when I was trying to fall asleep at night. I had not had a sustainable way of falling asleep at night for years. By that, I mean I used substances to fall asleep every night for years. And it wasn't until I was 19 that I started to even get an opportunity to be trying to fall asleep without depending on substances. And really quickly, what I learned was that I was so anxious that one of the ways I describe it is that like I couldn't even get my breath into a rhythm so that I could like calm down at all. Have you ever had that experience of like your breath, you can't even get like a normal rhythm with your breathing?
Yeah, I have.
I don't know if people can relate to that. And I'm so grateful that it has been a really long time since I have felt what that felt like. But I remember it like it was yesterday, how, you know, the activities of the day being concluded and kind of being on my own with myself to fall asleep. It like inadvertently, accidentally, unintentionally did make space for a bunch of stuff to show up, but then none of that made for sleeping. And I'm a person who, it seems like some people can survive better with less or more sleep than others. Some of us seem to be more sensitive to sleep. And really, to perform optimally in life, 8 hours is really what it has been for me for a long time. I'm not saying I can't go 6 hours for a night. I can. 2 nights in a row starts to show signs of me not living optimally. And I know that's kind of a funny way of saying it, but what I mean is increased irritability, increased impulsivity, agitation. I am not my best self when I'm not regularly getting 8 hours of sleep a night. And to me, it was greatly empowering to come to learn that and reconcile with that for myself. Now I can just be responsible for ensuring that I get an adequate amount of sleep and prioritizing that so that I can live my best life, you know? So even at 19, I knew I needed some sleep. And I don't think anyone was saying, hey, you should meditate. I really think it was like, I'm desperate and I don't know how to fall asleep. And I didn't read a book. And I feel now somehow a little shy, even though I had planned to share this. But I started just counting my breaths. So noticing that it was hard for me to get a rhythm with my breathing because I was so anxious, I just started to count 1 in, 2 out, back and forth. 1, 2, 3. And at some point, I would drift off to sleep. So it was something that held my attention in the right balance. It was not rigid. It wasn't enforced. I didn't sit down to tell myself, count 300 breaths or whatever. It really was just this kind of a practice that arose out of necessity. And it was effective pretty right away with the result I was looking for. It was not too long after that I started to kind of expand. I would notice counting. I would count in pyramids. I would count 10 breaths and then 9 breaths and then 8 breaths and, experiment a little bit. And then I would notice that just counting wasn't holding enough of my attention anymore. And I would notice, the anxiety arise even when I was counting. And so I would make a little change and I counted in a different language. And then I would use that for a while, and then I would notice, wow, that's interesting. I can count in French up to 10 and back with my breaths and then still be having thoughts about what happened today. And it gave me my first real experience of an opportunity to observe how my mind was working in a kind of a gentle way. I think it really did help that I wasn't trying to do anything. I just was doing what seemed good to do. Having that no attachment. I didn't have a timer on. I didn't, it was just what needed to be done. And what else is there to say about that story? Well, one thing I can say is that I fall asleep with relative ease. I think I just talked in the last episode about reading when I fall asleep. But part of that is even just having, and I said this too, having the ability to focus on a book and not have a lot of thinking or feelings or thoughts, keep intruding. This is a big deal. This is no small thing. This we're going to keep talking about, but has bled into the rest of my life in very, very useful, happy ways.
So cool, because I also at 20 had this very similar experience. I had insomnia when I turned 20. And that's kind of when I started to, and I think I started doing the square breathing to try to fall asleep.
Square breathing?
That's what they'd call it, when you inhale and then you hold it for a certain amount of time. And you exhale and you hold it. And that's kind of when I started to read about Zen stuff and Zen stuff. I forget what books I was reading. Whatever was on my dad's shelf that was spiritual. A lot of cool Christian mysticism. But I was trying to fall asleep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I don't think you've told me that before.
I don't think so either.
And
that's why I think it's interesting that we have the same.
That is
timing.
interesting.
Timing is
Age, timing, also, and around sleep. I don't know if that's a common way of coming upon meditation as a practice. I want to not ignore that I had been exposed to meditation earlier in life.
Mm-hmm.
I recall my grandmother using a guided meditation tape occasionally when I was a kid. My grandmother played a big part in raising me, and I lived with her on and off in my childhood. And I do remember experimenting with the practice in that meditation. It was like a body scan meditation where you would sort of, ground awareness in different muscles. I don't ever recall doing that as a practice, or even ever putting it to use at any time other than when she had the tape on. And so I think that was a difference for me, is coming to find a spot in my life where implementing a tool was obvious. It was an obvious gap. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I suspect that has helped it be an empowering practice rather than for people who have never thought about meditation and basically find themselves practicing the 12 steps and then it's step 11 and they feel like they have to now meditate. I can see why there would be more of a rub there.
Yes. A couple of things. So one is, we're talking about sleep, in relation to this and a lack of sleep, and how, well, I guess I kind of do want to just acknowledge how awful that can be for some people. And you said some people need it, some people don't. When I was not being able to sleep, that's when I was felt like that something was very wrong. And, so that definitely was the catalyst for the beginning of, I think, this spiritual journey. And it was not that I wasn't spiritual before, but it was that desperate sort of seeking because of it's painful to not be able to sleep, and you talk now about having that ease, and it's like such a privilege, such a gift, right? Just kind of want to acknowledge that, because I'm sure there's people out there who are still struggling, but like also the sort of, it's that suffering, right, that kind of pushes us a little bit to like look to other things or explore these types of things.
Absolutely.
Right.
I thank you for acknowledging that. I definitely concur. Struggling with basic needs in life, whether that's getting ourselves fed or slept or clothed or housed, having our basic needs met adequately I can't say how critical it is. It's critical for good living. It's baseline stuff that I care about everybody having all of our basic needs met. In my book, we should be up to nothing else until we are up to that. And as kooky as it might sound, for me, creating this podcast, it does play a piece in supporting my community, having our needs met. Peace of mind is I don't see that it's available outside of having our needs like sleep and food met, and shelter and education and healthcare. And watching people have their basic needs met in those areas and not having peace of mind has also clued me into how critical it is as a need. Yes, struggling with sleep. I used the word desperate when I was talking about myself. Literally panic inducing to not be able to fall asleep. I have experienced that myself, and my heart is with people who are still experiencing that. We are sharing this to say, if somehow this can be put to use to alleviate someone's despair over their sleep, please have at it. And this is not to overlook all the other components at play that make going to sleep at night possible. I think another critical piece for us to share about our experience over our journey with meditation is to really say how we both found ourselves fixated on the idea that the gold standard for meditation would be to like find one practice and then do that practice sort of like a lot. When I say a lot, I mean like I really had it in my mind that if I was ever going to feel good and proud about my meditation practice, that I would probably do it for like an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. And now that sounds extreme. I don't have any problem saying, and I'm not saying if what is right for you is to meditate for 2 hours a day, that there's something wrong with that. For me, that is not what is on the table today. I now have a relationship to meditation that seems beautiful and fruitful and is not extreme like that. Nor does it rigidly adhere to some, I haven't done transcendental meditation for a half an hour every day for the last 20 years. It turns out I don't need that to feel good, grateful, connected, embedded in my meditation practice.
Yeah, that idea of... So I even took it further, I think. I kind of saw myself being like in some sort of wherever monks live. Like if I were to really develop my practice, like that would be the end of the road for me.
It's like living in meditation. Full-time conscription.
Well, you read about these people, like these yogi masters, right? And like they go off for like weeks and they just meditate. That's extreme. All power to you. I mean, that's great. That's not available in my life right now for me. Like that's not what I'm being asked to do. And I really like Carolyn Miss that in that she said there's like an audio book or a book about spiritual madness, and she says this day and age the calling isn't to necessarily be off sitting in an ashram, and it's more to be like inside of the chaos, so to speak. I liked that.
I love that you brought up Spiritual Madness. It's a talk that has been recommended to me many times. I have still never listened to it, even though I have access to it. And I'm making a note for myself to link to it in the show notes for anyone who wants to listen to that. Will you say her name again?
Carolyn Miss. Yeah.
Do you know how to spell that? No, we'll look it up and it'll be in the show notes. I have heard that that is an element there, and you've set me up perfectly to tell one of my favorite anecdotes.
Yay.
But we're going to do that when we come back after this break.
Okay.
Before we come back to talk about our current practices and the benefits of meditation and that anecdote I just mentioned, we pause here to thank and acknowledge our listener supporters. Thank you to our Patreon patrons who have early access to each show. Find out more at patreon.com/C12Pod. Thank you to our reviewer, Keds, who encourages us to keep up the good work. Keds, thank you for sharing your appreciation. Your encouragement means more than we can say. And to each of you tuning in, thank you. Your time and attention is seriously appreciated.
Thank you.
Emily's nodding. Okay, my anecdote. So I had a professor at my local community college who I really liked. He's an anthropologist and a fisherman. And so many of you in the Seattle area will know who I mean. His name's Pete Knudsen. He owns Loki Fishing. I don't know if it's called fishing. Loki. They sell their fish at local farmers markets, and Pete's a great guy. He told a story about traveling to, and I want to say I don't have a great memory, and I'm going to recount the anecdote as I recall it that has served me many times. So Pete talked about traveling to India in, I think, the 1970s, hoping to immerse himself in some, authentic meditation. And upon arriving at the ashram and meeting the monks and having this welcome to the facility, Pete said something like, well, where do we sit and meditate? And the monk kind of looked at him like, what do you mean? And he goes, oh, right. That sitting thing, that's something you Westerners do. We work. We live meditatively. And I don't know if that's the whole story. Maybe Pete will come on the show and clear it up for us. But I'm not kidding when he said that, when he talked about this distinction around understanding about meditation and living meditatively, it made some things click for me that made a big difference. And we're going to talk a little bit more later about living meditatively and how we really think that's where the juice is here.
I can sense that might be where the juice is, because there is, I just want to reiterate that, it just doesn't seem to cut it to sit and then go into the world, and there's a disconnect there as someone who has tried that sitting thing.
Well, I think, can I add and ask if this is what you're saying?
Sure.
To sit and then return to the world sort of in the same state you were before you sat.
Yeah, I mean,
that the point is about being on the train.
There seems to be a little bit of a difference. And I think something's happening here. I think some things are shifting, but it doesn't, there just seems to be more. So I'm glad we're talking about it.
So to conclude our segment about what it's like for us now in our experience with meditation, I wanted to say what seems critical about my current practice is that I'm sure it doesn't hurt that I have had all of this exposure to different methods of meditation. I don't think that poses a barrier to my meditation practice, but that I strive to be sort of assessing my life and how I'm doing as a clue to guide me for what I might need or not need in my practice. So really making space to listen for what's appropriate. And you've heard me in the show talk before about 3rd step meditations. I also practice 7th step meditations and 9th step meditations and 12th step meditations. So I don't assume that I need 3, 7, 9, 12, 10, every day. But I kind of think of myself as responsible for knowing what on earth is going on with myself enough to, in conjunction with my conscience, observe what is actually needed.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a really good way of saying, to talk about the process. Yeah. I have the same experience.
And the reality is that because of this, what I do changes over time. And this experience of having my spiritual practice look like different things and include different pieces at different times is not limited to meditation. Now, part of this is that I don't practice a traditional religion. I know that a big piece of why my spiritual practices have so much flexibility is that I don't come from a very defined, rigid tradition. And for me, that is a benefit. For me, I see the fruits of having to have had to find my own way through. I'm going to tell another quick story. I met a man on an airplane once. Did you know that this was where I was going?
No, but I'm glad to hear more about this.
I met a man on an airplane. He's from Jordan. He's a Jordanian man. And we had an unusually deep, intimate, and connected conversation on a flight from Seattle to New York. We struck up an email correspondence after having met on the plane, and a big component of what we talked about was how his invitation of me to become Muslim. This was a gift to me. I was grateful that in our communication, he was respectful, curious, interested, open about his own experiences. It was really, I can't say enough how valuable it was to me to get to enjoy this interaction over a couple of years. The reason I am mentioning this now is that it gave us both an opportunity to share our beliefs. He shared about his beliefs and practices, and I shared about my beliefs and practices as a non-religious person. And we both were moved by each other's practices and relationships to God and to a spiritual life. And we both shared very openly about how much we admired and appreciated each other's paths. And for him, he told me he didn't, I hope it's okay for me to say this. He told me it hadn't occurred to him before that there might be people who aren't religious or specifically aren't Muslim who are actively seeking to live the way I am, who are striving to live in alignment with our conscience or God or however you want to say that. It helped him. It was inspiring to him. He was relieved and grateful. It was a mutual gift.
Yeah, I mean, I can see like living with the belief that there's so many people who aren't in communication with your God, which would, if you care about fellow humans, yeah, like how terrible that must have been. And then it sounds like another way of saying that is he realized maybe you were talking to the same God.
Something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think he would still be very happy if I became Muslim. And he it was like he trusted that if what's right for me is to be Muslim, I am at the ready to be Muslim. Same with practicing any rigid or traditional practice in my spiritual practice. I actually make space in meditation to invite my conscience to keep showing me how I'm to devote myself and serve and practice and honor, worship even. And because of that, there are like things come and go and change and flex. I feel a little shy saying this, but there are times when I like sing or chant as part of meditation. And then there are times when that doesn't seem to be what is called for. And that feels great. It feels like I get what's needed.
Mine has a lot of dance in it.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Dancing helps me.
So for both of us, we have found that, well, clearly that our meditation has kind of broadened to include practices other than literally just holding our body in one still pose or trying to not have any thoughts, even though we've both experimented with these things.
Still do.
And still do. But that it has grown to include practices for making space, breaking things up, and making sure we are receiving guidance, not just from our fear, ego, or thinking. And actually, I wanted to say, you had talked about like getting insights about how we're interacting in the world as a benefit of meditation. And I totally agree, although I also acknowledge like analytical process thinking is not part of my meditation. So I'm not saying there's no thought happening ever, but that for me, there is a distinction between like hammering something out mentally and making space for new information to arise.
Absolutely. I do want to clarify or just what I meant by that, which is I think in the process of meditation, whatever meditation becomes for somebody, but in the process of meditation, there is becoming more in alignment with yourself. So I feel like there's less of, I don't know, I guess it's radical to say this, but like, I do think that like, if we were all to live more meditatively, if we said we were, if we advocated for diversity, we would have more diversity. I guess that's kind of like what my train of thought was.
Like more access to integration.
Right. Yes. Integration.
Well, it's funny you say it that way, but this step 11 about deepening surrender, which for us has certainly included meditation, is
all about integration.
Well, it's the step before what I think of as truly the one for integration, where we talk about practicing principles all over our lives,
right.
Which for me is really the summation of all this work toward integration. I don't think that's any surprise.
I think we're connecting some dots here. This is nice.
It is nice. So that leads us pretty happily into segment 3, benefits. And we thought we'd first touch on what I think of as indirect benefits, but in some ways, these are very hard to untangle. Like, is being able to fall asleep at night with ease a direct benefit or an indirect benefit? I don't really know. But I do know that I have evidence of this living meditatively. Not that it hasn't taken some energy to ensure that my meditation practice is resulting in living meditatively, but that through my meditation, I now know and observe that I do live more meditatively. And I want to give an example of that. So we've talked before in the show about the crowbar, like cramming a crowbar in between our stuck together thoughts, rigid thoughts. And bear with me, but for me, the crowbar is actually synonymous with what I think of as mindfulness. So the word mindfulness, it's so it's almost trendy, I guess is a word for it, that I don't, sometimes it feels like that waters something down when it's all over. I mean, think about diversity's all over, and it seems like it's easier for me to see where we're not honoring diversity than where we are. Mm-hmm. And I think that can be the same with anything. So the term mindful, now I see it attached to a walk in the, like a structured walk through a park, or a yoga class, or a health fair event that just, it's almost like it's getting thrown around a lot. Mindfulness as a concept, the way I came to understand it, was a very specific thing, which is having the ability to not just do the automatic thing, whether that's jump to a conclusion. You did this. My mind automatically says that means this. Mindfulness says, oh, hang on a second. Let's check this out. Could it mean some other things? For me, that's the heart of mindfulness, is that, I don't know, I don't think of it as stepping back. I really think of it as like a crowbar. We got to get the crowbar in there between when you do something and when I interpret it. For me, that's mindfulness. And it does appear as though, as I have developed a meditation practice, I have far more access to this in my life.
Yes, I can see that. You have far more access to that in your life.
You can see that I have access to it. Okay.
Right. And mine has grown.
You're kind of making a joke.
So I'll just say,
yeah.
I love my mom so much, and we've been fighting. And I can say, though, that while we're fighting, I have had the opportunity to have the thought, hey, maybe you are super wrong about some of the things that are popping up into your head and that are like causing you to say the things that you're saying. So I love you, Mom, so much if you're listening. And this is why I do this stuff. This is totally why I do this stuff.
Because it matters it
matters
in our day-to-day lives, that we're not just doing our reflexes and automatic reactions to everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That we want to reap the benefits of having nurtured, thoughtful connections with our people around us.
Yes, and I think it's okay to say now, just briefly, that we talked earlier about how when we cause harm, it's permanent, or like.
So sorry to burst your bubble. We actually were talking about that off air.
Yes, we were talking about it off air.
Oh, I see. So our listeners won't know what you mean.
No, but I think that's all we have. That's all I really have to say is, like, causing harm is not just something you can undo. And so for me, at least, this is the alternative. This is how I can be responsible for, like, maybe causing less harm.
Thank you for saying that. That's beautiful. And for me, it's incentivizing. I join you in being interested, continuing to grow my interest in not causing harm. And yes, I agree. This is my access. This is my access to having a life that isn't completely wrapped around impulsivity and reaction.
Yeah. Like, otherwise, that's why we're here. That's why we're interested in this. If it was okay to cause harm, if it didn't matter, I would probably just bump around and not like deal with this stuff. But I guess that's not what my experience has been. Like, I'm getting some sort of insight that maybe that's not what life is about.
I dig it.
Yeah.
Okay, so direct benefits of meditation. I put this at the end, like this is what everybody's waiting for, but that's not really how I relate to it.
Here's the grand finale.
I just wanted to be able to go to sleep, and I have that. And then I have found this beautiful life experience and journey as a meditator. I guess if people are just dying to know, sorry, before we jump into direct benefits, some days I meditate for kind of a longer time, to me, that would be more like a half an hour. I'm talking about in the morning. So I do find that it's good and useful for me almost every day to break away from the other activities of my day and to kind of intentionally examine where I am and what's needed, and then to do whatever offering, I like that word you used, as a meditation. And sometimes, like we said, sometimes I sing, sometimes I light a candle, sometimes I chime a chime, sometimes I have my eyes open, sometimes I have my eyes closed, sometimes I use a guide. I guess I could just go on and on. Sometimes I read something inspiring to get me started. Sometimes I just make space to allow whatever to come up. Mm-hmm. It looks a lot of different ways. That has come to be an asset, not something I feel ashamed of.
Same. Mine is the same. I absolutely have lots of days, and I have the privilege to have the time because I'm like a graduate student and I only work twice a week, so my schedule is flexible. So I can sit for an hour during my day. I know that that's not available to a lot of people, but and what I get out of that is something. So what I've gotten out of that, the sitting thing, is, yes, like I said, it's like an offering to God, to my God. I'm here with you. I'm going to give something back to you, like my time and my attention. It's like really all I have to give, right? But mindfulness too is, for me, when I'm sitting, I see how much at certain times of the day, like suffering is happening inside of me, right? That I'm responding to in my day. So yes, it's uncomfortable to sit, because I think as human beings, like we have a lot of us have a stress response activated that we don't know about. We have like cortisol,
like we
shooting
walk
through our
around
veins
in a stress response,
yes,
unknowingly. Mm-hmm.
And that's nice to know about when it's happening, because maybe that has something to do with our behavior and our thoughts and our feelings. And so that's helped me to just kind of be like, okay, it's connected to the way I act in the world is like some deep fear, and to sit with that and to develop a relationship with that isn't like panicky. Like it's just kind of like, that's the key for me, is like that equanimity or whatever, like being able to observe what's happening inside of my human experience and accepting it.
That's great. Thank you for saying that. It reminded me of something that I kind of can't believe we haven't already said, which is that, so I had somebody ask me a long time ago, maybe I've even said this on the show before, could I maybe get some help with meditation? I keep falling asleep while I'm meditating.
Yeah, I hear that a lot too.
And with this person, they weren't getting enough sleep. That was the whole mystery there. It wasn't too complicated. We didn't need a better detective than me to notice that what was going on was that they needed more sleep. Similarly, along those lines, some of us who don't like meditating or find we have a hard time meditating, I have noticed it's that we are actively attempting to avoid and suppress matters in our lives. Mm-hmm. And meditating is going to be big conflict with that. Mm-hmm. No, I mean, of course we won't like meditating if we find that when we sit down to meditate, we are confronted with that we haven't paid our parking tickets. Just as an example. Nobody wants to sit around thinking about their parking tickets. My hot tip would be pay your parking tickets if at all possible, and be grateful for the clue that you got in meditation that not paying your parking tickets is actually being a barrier in your life more than you have been telling yourself the truth about.
Right.
This is, I should have said this for myself. I trust that what comes up in meditation are sort of clues about unaddressed loose ends, all kinds of things.
Right. Whether that means you've been sitting or walking or dancing or whatever your thing is.
Yes. And again, back to living meditatively, I strive to have space for these things to arise all the time. It kind of freaks me out, the idea that I might be walking through life making so much noise that I can't hear the things that I need to hear. I want to hear that stuff. I want to hear these messages of guidance about how to live well. And yes, for me, it's a great sign when I'm in the shower and I get some guidance like this. And, you know, I'm a person who likes to listen to podcasts. I've said that before. I don't listen to podcasts all day, every day. For me, listening to podcasts can like be too noisy for me to be getting guidance coming through. And sometimes I need like many hours in a day where I'm not getting other input that can kind of obscure spiritual guidance.
Absolutely.
Even music can be that way. And showering for me is a good example of something that I can do as just habit or kind of thoughtlessly, or something I can do meditatively with some intention to use it as an occasion to hear stuff coming up. Okay, back to our direct benefits. Huge, huge, huge. I love it. I can't even say. The first bullet point we have here is attention. And what I mean by that is, through a practice of meditation, I have come to find that I actually have some say, some power regarding where I direct my attention. I really, as a young person and even as an adult, it did seem as though my attention went wherever it went, and it was kind of like not up to me. Like if circumstances would, like catch my attention, and then, sorry, that's what has my attention. I do think in part due to my meditation practice, which has included developing a practice of focusing my attention and refocusing my attention, like building those muscles to be responsible for where my attention is, it has bled it over into the rest of my life.
Have you read that Kahneman book, Thinking Fast and Slow?
No. Should we link it in the show notes?
Yeah, let's link it in the show, because there are, like, he talks about that there are two different systems of attention, and if we want to connect this to, like, scientific research, I mean, why wouldn't we? It's cool because we do have, like, system 1 is automatic, system 2 is intentional.
I was out of touch with that intentional attention system. And practicing meditation, I mean, think about even what I'm talking about with going to sleep at night. If I just leave it all up to my automatic, I really may be anxious or in reflex to whatever circumstances. But developing the ability to, well, and really, I mean, maybe we'll talk about this more in our show about prayer. I talk to myself about where my attention is. So sometimes when I notice that my attention has drifted off to, I don't know, worry about something, whether personal or political, I'll say, oh, Paige, it's not time for that right now. It's time for sleep. And it might sound kind of, I don't know, funny or silly or something, but I have come to talk very gently and lovingly to myself. Another gift of meditation. Yelling at myself, Paige, what the hell is wrong with you? Get back to thinking about the guided meditation. Come on, like, obviously that's not the right thing. But over years, I mean, really the people in my life, I think, will concur. I really am very gentle with myself. And that doesn't mean I'm off the hook. Like, I'm still responsible and productive and all these honest and hardworking and all these things. But I take a really gentle approach with myself.
Which is, I think, directly why you are able to offer that to other people.
Well, thank you for saying that. It matters a lot to me to bring gentleness to people. I see that we are in short supply of it in the world.
To bring gentleness and also encourage people to be responsible at the same time.
Yes, thank you.
Right.
Yes, this is not a permit or what do you call that? Permissiveness. This is not about permissivity. But yes, we can have gentleness and rigor at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else to say about attention?
It's just that, one is harder than the other. Evolution, like biologically, it just is. And it's practice. You've obviously had years of practice. So it doesn't happen overnight. And be gentle with yourselves if you're attempting this.
I think I used to resent that there were things that took time to develop. That sounds so immature now that I'm saying it, but really I can see it's true that I wanted instant gratification. I wanted to think if I put my mind to something, I could make it happen overnight, and obviously this just isn't how things work. And I don't know if it's maturity or including just getting older and having had more time to do things, but I don't have as much beef with that there are things that take time, whether that's developing physical muscles or emotional muscles. It's actually great. It's a beautiful, interesting part of life.
Thank you for sharing that. I like that.
So our last piece about a direct benefit of meditation that I don't hear talked about much is, it's funny because we say the word, but discipline. I hear a lot of people talk about how undisciplined they are. I very rarely hear anybody talk about being disciplined. Do you?
Rarely.
I mean, maybe like even professional athletes seem to talk more about not being disciplined.
It's the more disciplined people, I think, that talk more about being undisciplined, right? It's like that perfectionistic.
Oh, interesting.
thing.
Okay, so that's probably a component. I also think that growing discipline isn't something we hear much about. It seems like a thing almost like charisma. People assume that they either have it or they don't have it, which then lets us off the hook for developing it or nurturing it. And I have come to find out, this is reminding me of our talk about neuroplasticity in the last episode, there's far more that I do have a say over and influence over with my actions and behaviors and thoughts than I used to think, including learning discipline or to be disciplined. Same with math. I mean, a lot of us have thought that we were either good at math or not, almost like singing, or I don't even know, even singing though. If you do it enough and you get some lessons and learning and practice, you're a better singer. So discipline. Okay, back to discipline and meditation. So I don't think I had a lot of practice at being disciplined. And now I have practiced being disciplined in a number of different areas in my life. And the fruit of that, I can't really say enough how much of a relief it is and how much of a piece of trusting that I can be responsible for living well. It's a part of it.
I have that with writing. Something I observed, just like a very concrete example. I never thought I'd be better at writing for academically. Academic writing sucked because you had to edit your stuff. You had to actually read it and edit it and go line by line.
You poor baby.
And now I've grown a lot. I've it's the feedback I keep getting is that I'm, a strong writer, and I can
Wow.
see it, and
Practice.
it's only practice.
And there is an aspect of discipline with practice. So I guess I didn't look up the definition of practice, but for me, what I think of as practice is like a standing commitment to be doing the thing and then continuing to do it over time, kind of regardless of circumstances. So even though I talked about the content of my meditation changing a lot, that I meditate has not really been in question. Not to say there haven't been spells or periods where it's been much harder or so hard I didn't do it for periods of time. But by and large, well, and at this point for years, most days I meditate. Same with a bunch of other aspects of my spiritual practice. There's no overstating the value of having practices, habits like that embedded in our lives, in my experience. I remember when I only got the benefits of meditating on the occasions when I felt like meditating or felt like I needed to, and it wasn't just like a working part of my life. It is so much easier now. It takes so much less effort to do it, to remember to do it. It's just like a working part of my life. I am so grateful to have come to that and learned to create and develop that, not only with meditation, but I'm also thinking of like service work and community participation and prayer and other health practices. They're just working parts of my life now. That's discipline. That is part of discipline.
And the great thing about it is I really do think that as long as we stay interested in it, that we can get there.
Well, and I've even found I can be responsible for maintaining my level of interest and get curious about exploring when interest waxes and wanes. I've talked a little bit about my rowing machine, and when did I get that? In March, I think. So I've been rowing not that long, 4 months or something. Even in this period of time, my kind of excitement about it, my interest level has had, little fluctuations, wax and waned, back and forth. And in part because of I really think my meditation practice, I can take more of an observer role with that and be curious and interested and have it not dictate whether or not I exercise, which was my old reflex, was that if my interest waned, then I wasn't doing it.
Yeah, me too.
Another huge buon of discipline and dedication, which are things I didn't think of about myself. I didn't think of myself as dedicated or disciplined, and I still don't feel like that's who I am, but I can also say that I've had a good amount of access to it, and they're working parts of how I live now.
Me too, more than before. Absolutely. And which is a miracle for me, for sure.
Well, tune in for our follow-up show when we'll discuss more common hang-ups, pitfalls, and traps associated with meditation, more about rigidity, more about feeling bad about our practices, and we'll touch on what we think of are some kind of complex, almost unintended consequences of meditation. We'll definitely come back to these topics again, but that's all for now. Thank you for joining us. This show isn't a thing without you. Please do find us online. Write to us. We're listening for how best to serve. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, all at C12Pod. Again, that's C12Pod. We haven't been mentioning this in episodes, but we're also on YouTube, where you can find us by searching for C12Pod. It's not a video podcast, it's just a static image, but I know that some of our listeners prefer to access us through YouTube. And for now, we've pulled back from posting to SoundCloud and Vimeo, but we'll return to those platforms at another time if we get feedback for that. It looks to us as though our community could really use this content, and we are excited to continue to create and share it. This is a 100% listener-supported show, so please, if you already like what you're hearing, or even if you don't like it, but you think what we're up to is good, please contribute through Patreon at patreon.com/C12Pod, and support us by subscribing, rating the show, and writing us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you to each of you who contribute to this work.
Thank you.